Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Imagine this. You come home after a long, exhausting day. All you want is to unlock your door, step inside, and finally rest. But instead, right in front of you, boxes of your belongings, clothes thrown outside, the door lock changed. And then your eyes land on the security camera screen. A cold, unyielding face stares back at you, your mother-in-law. Her voice, sharp, merciless, final. Nathan has realized you're not worthy of this family. Leave now, before I make things worse. Your husband is nowhere to be found. His phone, disconnected. You have no idea what's happening. And then, the brutal truth unravels. Nathan, the man you loved, had been manipulated for weeks by his own mother. Her goal? To erase you from his life forever. But they underestimated you. Did they think you'd break down and walk away? No. You decide to fight back. You're ready to do what they never saw coming. A dark secret is about to be exposed. Are you ready? Keep reading. Because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about family. Down. But in the beginning, a midnight betrayal. After a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, Emily Carter dragged her exhausted body home. Her legs aching, her back sore. All she wanted was to collapse into bed and drift into a deep sleep. But the moment she stepped onto the porch, a deep unease washed over her. Something was wrong. Her house stood before her, familiar, yet off. The front door was locked, yet the lights were still on inside. The silence, unsettling, so quiet. She could hear the wind rustling through the trees. A chill ran down her spine. Her heart pounded harder. And then, she saw her. Vivian Monroe. Her mother-in-law stood by the door, eyes sharp with triumph. This woman had always carried herself with elegance, but tonight, there was no attempt to hide her satisfaction. Well, well, you finally made it home. Vivian's voice dripped with cold amusement. Emily frowned. Exhaustion weighed down her body, but a creeping sense of dread settled in her gut. What are you doing here? Her voice was steady, but nothing could have prepared her for Vivian's next words. Nathan has thought it through. He realized you're not worthy of this family. It felt like a dagger had been plunged straight into Emily's chest. What? Nathan, the man she had loved, the man who had promised to stand by her. And now, he was saying she wasn't worthy? Her breath hitched. Number that couldn't be true. She grabbed her phone, dialed Nathan's number, blocked. Her heart stopped. Number, this couldn't be happening. She tried again. A text. No delivery confirmation. FaceTime. Nothing. Nathan had disappeared. She gripped her phone tightly. Stay calm. Think. You're lying. I need to talk to Nathan right now. Vivian shrugged. Then, she pulled a folded letter from her coat pocket, shoved it toward Emily. He left this for you. A handwritten note. Emily's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the hurried scribbles. Emily, I'm sorry. I need a fresh start. This is for the best. The handwriting, messy, shaky. It didn't look like Nathan's usual neat, confident strokes. Something was off. Nathan didn't write this on his own. Her blood ran cold, but she fought against the panic clawing at her chest. Where is Nathan? I want to hear this from him. Vivian crossed her arms, smirking. He's not here. He's where he belongs, with his mother. He's rethinking this marriage. It felt like a thunderbolt had struck her. Number, this wasn't Nathan. The man she married would never walk away like this, would never leave her without a word, without a real conversation. I don't believe you. Let me inside. Emily stepped forward, but Vivian blocked her path. There's no need for that. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Emily. You were never part of this family. I knew from the beginning. You were never good enough for Nathan." Those words, a deep rage ignited inside her. Not good enough? What had she done wrong? She had loved Nathan, cared for him, sacrificed for their marriage, and now she was being tossed aside like she never mattered. And then she saw it. Beside the door, neatly stacked boxes, her clothes, her books, her personal belongings, thrown outside like she never existed. At that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a setup. They had planned this all along. So, did they expect her to break down? To cry and leave quietly? Pinnal yen. She wouldn't back down. Emily clenched the letter in her fist, her eyes burning with determination. "Vivian, do you really think you can get rid of me that easily? Just watch." Emily Carter would not be a victim. She would uncover the truth. She would find Nathan, and she would not let anyone control her life. They had underestimated her, and now they would regret it. This story is just beginning. To the horrifying truth, Nathan was drugged late at night. Cold air swept through the streets as Emily Carter sat in her car, gripping her phone tightly, her heart racing. Vivian Monroe's words echoed in her head like a nightmare. Nathan couldn't have made this decision on his own. She knew something was terribly wrong. She needed to uncover the truth. Without hesitation, Emily called Olivia Bennett, her best friend and a brilliant lawyer. The moment Olivia heard what happened, she knew this wasn't just a simple divorce. "Emily, if Nathan truly wanted to leave you, he would have told you himself, not sent his mother to do it." That was too obvious. Emily had been trying to reach Nathan, but her number was still blocked. Even her texts got no response. This wasn't like him. The question was, where was Nathan, and why wasn't he speaking for himself? Emily knew she couldn't figure this out alone. She needed an ally. And the first person that came to mind, Ethan Monroe, Nathan's younger brother. Ethan had always had a strained relationship with their mother, and he was the only person in the Monroe family Emily could still trust. "Ethan, do you know where Nathan is?" "He's at my parents' house," Ethan admitted, but hesitation filled his voice. "Mom says he needs to rest, but he's been off social media for over a week. I've tried calling, but he won't pick up." A week? That only confirmed Emily's worst fears. Nathan wasn't the kind of man to just disappear. He wouldn't just cut off everyone. There was only one way to get answers. Emily and Ethan decided to sneak into the Monroe estate that very night. The Monroe mansion loomed in the darkness. Ethan led the way, using his personal key to unlock the back gate. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she scanned their surroundings. They had to find Nathan. They crept inside, careful not to make a sound. The house was massive. Even the lightest footsteps echoed eerily through the silence. Ethan signaled toward the library, where his father, Robert Monroe, used to spend hours reading. He might be in there. But when they opened the door, they froze. Nathan was slumped in an armchair, his head hung low, his eyes glazed over. He looked at them, but he didn't recognize them. Emily's heart shattered. Nathan's body looked frail, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. No, this wasn't the man she knew. Emily rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Nathan! It's me, Emily. Can you hear me?" He blinked slowly, struggling to focus. "E.M.?" His voice was weak, as if he had just woken up from a long, drugged sleep. Ethan clenched his fists. What the hell did she do to him? The biggest question now was, how did a perfectly healthy man end up like this? Emily instantly knew something was wrong. She placed a hand on Nathan's forehead, burning hot. She glanced at the table beside him, a teacup, still warm, and scattered blister packs of pills. She pieced it together immediately. Nathan had been drugged. There was no time to waste. Emily turned to Ethan. "Call an ambulance, now!" Ethan obeyed instantly, while Emily tried to keep Nathan conscious. "Nathan, what did you drink?" "Tell me." Nathan furrowed his brows, his mind foggy. "Mom, she gave me tea every day, said it would help me relax. But the more I drank, the harder it was to think." Emily's blood ran cold. Vivian Monroe had been drugging her own son. She had been doing it for weeks, slowly breaking down Nathan's ability to think clearly. Everything made sense now. She hadn't just tried to separate Nathan and Emily. She wanted complete control over him, and she had used medication to do it. But Emily wouldn't let her win. By the time the ambulance arrived, Nathan was barely able to stay conscious. The paramedics quickly checked his vitals and collected blood samples for testing. What they found left everyone speechless. Nathan had been poisoned with a combination of strong sedatives and mind-controlling drugs. Vivian Monroe had tried to turn her son into a puppet. Emily stood outside the ambulance, watching as Nathan was placed onto the stretcher. But this wasn't fear anymore. This was determination. Vivian thought she could control Nathan. She thought she could erase Emily. She had made the biggest mistake of her life. Emily Carter wasn't going to let this end here. And this was only the beginning. 3 Vivian on the run, a heart-pounding chase. Late night at the hospital. Emily sat beside Nathan's hospital bed, her hand tightly gripping his. She watched him sleep peacefully, his breathing steady, his body finally free from the drugs. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Nathan, helpless, barely able to recognize her, but now he was safe. However, one more thing had to be done. Vivian Monroe. She was behind all of this, and she had to pay. Emily stood up, her gaze sharp, determined. She wasn't going to let Vivian escape. Immediately, she contacted Olivia Bennett, her best friend and a fearless lawyer. Within minutes, Olivia arrived at the hospital, a folder full of evidence in her hands. "We have everything we need to bring her to justice," Olivia declared. "I've already contacted the police. They're heading to Vivian's house right now." The hunt was on. The police move in, but nothing goes as expected. When the police arrived at Vivian Monroe's house, something felt eerily wrong. No lights were on, no movement. And most concerning of all, there was no sign of Vivian. They broke down the door, only to find an empty house. Vivian was gone. Emily felt her stomach drop. No way. She couldn't have vanished just like that. Olivia quickly pulled out her laptop, accessing the financial data she had been secretly monitoring. If Vivian was on the run, she would need money. And just as expected, a suspicious transaction had just been made from Vivian's account. She had withdrawn a large sum of money and booked a flight to Florida. She wasn't just running, she was planning to disappear. Olivia immediately called federal law enforcement, providing them with Vivian's location and financial transactions. Emily clenched her fists. She thinks she can run? I'll personally make sure she ends up behind bars. The chase had begun. A high-stakes pursuit. Vivian tries to flee the country as the police worked to track down Vivian. Olivia continued monitoring her financial movements. She wasn't just escaping to Florida. She was planning to flee to the Cayman Islands, a tax haven. If Vivian boarded that plane, she would escape all charges and could never be extradited back to the US. They had to stop her. Immediately, Olivia contacted law enforcement at Miami International Airport, where Vivian's flight was scheduled to depart. We need to stop a passenger named Vivian Monroe at security check-in. She's attempting to flee the country. Less than an hour before takeoff, Emily and Olivia jumped into a car, speeding toward the airport. Meanwhile, a federal task force was already moving into position. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the moment of arrest. Vivian gets caught just before takeoff Miami International Airport, 11:45 p.m. Undercover officers positioned themselves around the security checkpoint, eyes locked on a woman with blonde hair, dressed in an expensive coat, casually pulling her suitcase toward the check-in counter. It was Vivian Monroe. She walked toward the gate, unaware that every eye was on her. Just a few more steps. Vivian Monroe, stop right there. You're under arrest. Officers swarmed from all directions, surrounding Vivian. Just before she reached the boarding gate, she froze, her face drained of color. "What are you doing? I haven't done anything wrong," she shrieked. An officer held up a folder, stacked with irrefutable evidence. "Vivian Monroe, you are under arrest for poisoning, illegal confinement, psychological manipulation, and fraudulent misappropriation of assets." Vivian struggled, but there was no escape. In sheer desperation, she even tried to bribe the officers. "I can pay you whatever you want. Just let me go." But this time, nothing could save her. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists. As officers led her away, Vivian Monroe's escape had officially come to an end. Justice is served. Vivian pays the price. Months later, Vivian Monroe stood trial. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Nathan's medical records proved he had been poisoned for weeks. Financial statements showed she had illegally seized assets. Surveillance footage, threatening messages, and testimonies from Nathan and Ethan sealed her fate. The court's ruling, Vivian Monroe was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She collapsed in the courtroom, completely defeated. This time, no one could save her. No money, no power, nothing. Emily stood from a distance, watching the scene unfold with a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, Nathan was safe, and Vivian, the woman who had tried to destroy their marriage, had finally faced the consequences she deserved. This was the ending she had brought upon herself. Emily squeezed Nathan's hand, her voice soft yet victorious. "We won, and this time, nothing could ever tear them apart again." 4. The twist. A father awakens. A quiet estate. On the outskirts of town. The Monroe family's living room was thick with tension. Nathan, Ethan, Emily, and William Monroe, the father of the two brothers. They sat around the table. But this was no warm family gathering. This was a reckoning. William Monroe, a once powerful man, now looked as if he had aged 10 years in just a few days. Since his wife, Vivian Monroe, had been arrested, he had barely spoken a word. But this wasn't just about Vivian paying for her crimes. It was about William finally facing his own past. He had turned a blind eye for far too long. The dark truth about Vivian is revealed. William placed his hands on the table. His sunken eyes revealed nights of sleepless regret. He looked at Nathan, his son, who had suffered unimaginably, after being poisoned by his own mother. With a heavy sigh, he finally spoke. "I was wrong. I let your mother have too much control for too long. And now, I can't keep living in denial." The room fell silent. Nathan and Ethan stared at their father, waiting for him to continue. And then, William began revealing the horrifying secrets about Vivian that no one knew. First, Vivian had planned to control Nathan's life for years. "Did you ever wonder, Nathan?" William sighed. "From the moment you were born, your mother decided your entire future. She never wanted you to have control over your own life." When Nathan was in college, Vivian secretly reached out to girls she deemed suitable, pressuring him to date them. She even tried to arrange a marriage between Nathan and the daughter of a wealthy family, to expand the Monroe family's influence. But when Nathan fell in love with Emily, Vivian lost control. She saw Emily as an unworthy outsider who didn't deserve her son, and from that moment on, Vivian began planning to eliminate Emily. None of this was a coincidence, Nathan. From the start, your mother was always working to separate you from Emily. The room grew colder. Emily's hands clenched, her eyes widened in shock. What did she do? Nathan's voice was hoarse with anger. How Vivian set up Emily. William continued revealing the things he had known, but had stayed silent about. Vivian had set traps for Emily multiple times without her ever realizing it. She once planted her expensive jewelry in Emily's bag and accused her of stealing. She sabotaged a critical contract Emily was working on at the hospital, nearly getting her fired. She hired people to follow Emily, creating fake situations to make Nathan doubt his wife's loyalty. I saw it all, but I stayed silent. I thought she was just a protective mother, but I was wrong. Ethan, the younger brother who had always been loyal to Nathan, slammed his fist on the table. You saw everything, and you said nothing? William lowered his head. I was a coward, but it didn't stop there. Vivian had planned to remove Emily long before she poisoned Nathan. When your mother realized Emily wouldn't be easily broken, she escalated. At first, she tried to destroy their marriage. When that failed, she took more extreme measures. She drugged him. She exploited Nathan's exhaustion and stress, secretly slipping sedatives into his tea to weaken his ability to think. Nathan's body stiffened. He was shaking with rage. She didn't just want to destroy my marriage. Nathan's jaw tightened. She wanted to control me, to turn me into her puppet. The air in the room became suffocating. Emily squeezed Nathan's hand. So everything she did, from start to finish, was to ensure Nathan remained under her control forever? William slowly nodded, as if he himself still couldn't believe what he was saying. Yes. And that is why I can never forgive her. William files for divorce. The end of it all the next day. William Monroe officially filed for divorce from Vivian Monroe. He had no reason to cover for her anymore. He no longer wanted any connection to the woman who had destroyed their family. And that meant Nathan and Ethan also decided to cut ties with their mother. She's no longer our mother, Nathan said, his voice cold. This family will have nothing to do with her ever again, Ethan agreed with a firm nod. Vivian Monroe had finally been abandoned by her own family. She had lost everything. Nathan, the son she had tried to control. Ethan, the son who had once seen her as a mother but now only felt disgust. William, the husband who had endured her for too long, but had finally awakened. For the first time in her life, Vivian Monroe was facing the consequences of her own actions, and finally, justice was served. A new ending. Emily reclaims her happiness. After everything, Emily Carter could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Vivian Monroe, the woman who had destroyed her marriage, manipulated her son, and tried to ruin Emily's life, had now been sentenced to 15 years in prison. But more importantly, Emily was no longer trapped in fear. She had taken back control of her own life. Nathan wakes up, his first apology to Emily in a bright hospital room. Nathan Monroe slowly opened his eyes. The fog that had clouded his mind for weeks was finally lifting. And then he remembered. The tea his mother brought him every night, always accompanied by her soothing but deceptive words, the constant fatigue, the inability to think clearly, the overwhelming haze in his mind. And then he remembered. Emily, the woman he had once loved, but had been manipulated into turning against. The woman who had fought for him, even when he hadn't been aware enough to fight for himself. Nathan turned his head. Emily sat beside him, just as she had for so many sleepless nights. She looked exhausted, but strong. She hadn't left his side, even when everyone else had turned away. Emily. Nathan's voice was hoarse, weak, but his eyes were filled with regret. Emily looked up, her eyes full of emotion. For the first time, Nathan was truly awake. "I'm sorry." 3 simple words, but they carried the weight of all his regrets. He was sorry for not protecting her from his mother. He was sorry for allowing himself to be manipulated. He was sorry for making her endure so much pain. Emily didn't say a word. She just held his hand. Nathan was finally back. Leaving the past behind, finding a new future. Once Nathan had fully recovered, they made a bold decision. They would leave this city, a place filled with too much pain and darkness. They would rebuild their lives from the ground up. No more manipulation, no more deception, no more Vivian Monroe. A month later, Emily and Nathan sold their old house, packed their bags, and drove toward a quiet lakeside town in the countryside. For the first time, they were free to decide their own future. A new life, peaceful and hopeful. Their new town was small, peaceful. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the fields stretched endlessly under the open sky. They bought a small house by the lake with a balcony overlooking the calm waters. Every morning, Emily could wake up to the sound of birds chirping, instead of the endless fights and manipulation of the Monroe family. Every evening, they sat on their porch, sipping warm tea, knowing that no one could ever disrupt their happiness again. For the first time, Emily felt at peace. She had reclaimed her life. Letters left unanswered, but the past never disappears so easily. Every month, a letter arrived from prison, from Vivian Monroe. She still hadn't given up. The words inside were full of lies and manipulation. "Emily, I know you still resent me, but you need to understand. Everything I did was for the family. Can you ever forgive me? Nathan is still my son, and one day, he will realize I was the one who truly loved him the most." Emily read the letter, then gently placed it on top of the unopened pile. She didn't need to respond. Vivian had no power over her anymore. No one did. This time, she was truly free. The end. Lessons learned 1. Never let anyone control your life. Emily spent years learning this lesson. She once believed she could change Vivian, that she could convince her to accept her. But the truth is, some people will never change, and no one should have the power to decide your worth. 2. Love the right person, but also love yourself. Emily loved Nathan, but that love could not justify enduring manipulation, could not excuse being controlled, could not mean losing herself. She had to fight for herself, and because of that, she truly reclaimed her happiness. 3. Sometimes, letting go is the best choice. Emily learned to let go, to walk away from a place filled with pain, to choose a new happiness. Sometimes, letting go is not a failure, it's freedom. Now, she is no longer a victim. She is a survivor. She chose a better future for herself. And what about you? If you were Emily, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Blast off.